think a lot of people can underestimate the impact that having a disorganized, ineffective, unsystemized team will and can have on everybody outside of your business. When you, as the CEO, as the entrepreneur, so caught up in the busyness of your business, it's easy to overlook that impact. The impact that your behind the scenes will have on your clients, your potential clients, and to be honest, anybody who's observing and noticing your brand. The reality is that anybody who comes into contact with your brand will form an opinion about your brand and whether they would like to one day, now or at some stage in the future, do business with you based on their experience with your brand, which ultimately is determined by the people that sit behind your brand. So if you've got an understaffed business, an understaffed brand, where it's you, maybe you're sitting there as either a solopreneur who, is struggling the time capacity juggle, or you're a entrepreneur with a team who still feels understaffed, when things are stretched too thin, it gets noticed. An undertrained team where you have new people who are thrown in the deep end and might be trying hard, in inverted commas, but haven't been trained well enough, that gets noticed. An inefficient team, the team that is taking the long road to do the things, that gets noticed. An inconsistent team where one person does something one way and another person does something another way because the business hasn't yet standardized its processes, that gets noticed. And on the flip side, of course, a business that's, a well-oiled machine where people are working within systems and being led at the front by a leader, that is also noticed, and by your clients, your future clients, and everybody else. So today's episode is a story of how these two very different types of team have been on display for me recently, in fact, on my street over the last 12 months, and what I can clearly see from an outsider and what I can see about the way their teams are operating in these two very different businesses. So that's what we're going to dive into today. Today's lesson is lessons from the tradies on my street. Let's go. So let me set the scene. I live in the north side of Brisbane, here in Queensland, in Australia. Our suburb, as was the case in many suburbs of Queensland and probably throughout Australia, has a lot of renovations happening. A lot of homes are getting renoed and the projects are small and big. So my beautiful neighbours who live across the road, who literally I'm looking at them now through the window, they started renovating their house about 12 months ago. Now, a completely separate situation happened about 2 years ago. We had massive flooding here in Brisbane, and the area that I live in, there is a creek near us, and the bottom of my street flooded. Now, if you can imagine, we live up on a hill, and all the houses down the hill, down the street, completely went underwater, like literally underwater right up onto the second floor. My husband was rescuing people and their dogs over their floor balconies on his stand-up paddleboard. It was hectic flooding. And so on the back of that, what happened was the government has bought back 5 houses at the bottom of my street. So for the last, 2 years, 5 houses have been, disconnected, removed, knocked over, demoed, returfed, etc., etc. And, the couple of houses that didn't get removed have been, repaired and renovated. And so it's safe to say that my tiny, quiet cul-de-sac in this leafy suburb of Brisbane has literally felt like Grand Central Station for the last 2 years with the amount of tradies and trucks and all the people that have been coming past. So I've seen my fair share of tradies coming and going. And now with an office that literally faces the road where my front veranda is my journaling spots, I'm literally watching the people coming and go. And there are 2 businesses that have really stood out to me. And the reasons that they've stood out to me is because of their team. And that's what I want to share with you today. Now, team 1. This is the team of builders that are renovating the house across the road, and it's taking 12 months. Now, it's incredibly interesting watching these people, watching these guys. When the renovation was kind of kicking off, they'd turn up and they'd just hang out on the site and not do much. It's like they would arrive at work, but you could just see them like faffing about. not sure where to get started, trying to make phone calls, asking questions, obviously trying to get instructions. Sometimes they'd go sit in the car for a while. Sometimes, I'd see them like obviously scrolling on their phones. Sometimes they'd spend like a really long amount of time unpacking their tools and moving their tools around. What was obvious to me was that clear instructions about what was expected of them were totally missing. Now let's jump to team 2. These are the guys who have a huge house removal business, and they were responsible for taking away quite a few of the houses on the street. And what that means was that they have to come along and they disconnect the house. So disconnect, like, I guess, the water and the electricity and all the things. They remove the lower part of the house, like they knock it down, and they prepare and secure the house to be moved. So, they hammer everything down, they secure it down, then they cut the house in 2 or 3. They load it onto a big Mack truck that reverses up, and then they take the house away. They spend a few days prepping the house. They always moved the houses at night around midnight with a police escort because it was a big thing to be doing. See, I told you, Grand Central Station, all the things are happening here. But this team was super interesting. When they came to the street, they were quite possibly the most efficient and incredible team I've potentially ever seen. They'd turn up together. Often they'd be in multiple vehicles, but they'd turn up together in a coordinated way. They'd roll out, they'd get to work fast. They were quiet, they were quick, they were efficient. Each person knew exactly where they needed to go, what they needed to do. It was so clear that each person had a specific role and they just got on with it. Every single person knew what was expected of them, what their job was, and it was actually so impressive to see them move at pace on the back of that clarity. So lesson 1 that I want to share with you is that people from the outside can tell if your team don't know what they're doing and what's expected of them. Not only is the experience when your team don't know what's expected of them, when they don't know what they need to be getting on with, when they're not able to get on and crack on, not only is that experience inefficient and costly for you as the business owner and behind the scenes for you, it's also like inefficient and frustrating for people who are waiting on them and watching it externally. And that frustration doesn't go away even when you can tell that somebody's trying. So let's go back to team 1, the Reno team. Now, if you follow me on socials, you've probably seen and heard me venting about the music that often is blaring from this house across the road. And on some days from the house across the road, from the Tradies, that is, not my beautiful neighbours. When they first set up, when this builder came on site, the guy who owns the company, the head builder, he came over, he introduced himself to me. It was lovely. He chatted to me, gave me his card and said to give him a call if I'd had any problems with what was happening. And then a few days in, he saw me out the front and checked in. So that was actually a really good start. And I mentioned that the music had been really, really loud, to which he responded, yeah, the guys have got a pretty big speaker. I'll ask them to turn it down. And I was like, oh, great. He's on to it. Yay. Next day, next week, music's back up. And, over a period of a couple of weeks, I'd go over there and I'd ask them to turn it down when it got too much for me, if I had to record something like this, because some days it definitely was worse than others. Now, one day it got pretty bad and I remember just feeling sick of having to go across the road. So I texted him and I let him know that the music was loud and asked him to sort it out. And by loud, I don't mean like it was just a little bit noisy. It was like, it's 3 a.m. at the club and everybody's kind of going nuts, kind of proper loud. And it was probably like 7 o'clock on a Monday morning. I was just like, this just feels entirely inappropriate. So I sent him a message and his response and his suggestion was to he's like, yeah, no worries, just go over and tell them to turn it down. To which I went back to him and said, look, mate, I've been over there like 3 times in the last week or 2. And I don't know how many times I need to go over and keep asking them. But this is your team. You tell them. It's not up to me to go and keep telling them what they should and shouldn't be doing. Are you okay with it? If you're not okay with it, then you deal with it. So because basically what the lesson I saw there and what was really obvious to me was it's not my job to manage your team. It's your job to manage your team through setting a process, through telling them what's okay and what's not okay, and then through having checks in place to see if that's being adhered to. So music goes down. after we have that little exchange, he's obviously told them and he's asked them to turn the music down. But then a few days go past again and the music's back up. And what I noticed, because literally I stare at this house all day, what I realized was that it was one person who, when they came on site, they brought the big speaker and they turned the music up. And what we realized, because this has been going for 12 months, was that the other people on site actually also didn't like how loud the music was, and they didn't like it when this guy came on. But there's no overarching system or process that says, hey, this is not the way this site runs. So I'm sure you've experienced that yourself, or maybe you even have that person in your team where one person comes in and dominates. Everybody operates in a certain way, but then when that one person comes in and tries to influence, things get changed. And so what's lacking, what I can see is lacking, is the leader making a clear rule, process, or system about what is and isn't okay when they're working together on behalf of his brand. There's no standardization in place for this particular brand, for this builder across the road. And so my question, if I was to be working with him and he was my client, I would say, do you as the owner want to be the sort of site that sounds like guys are dropping pills at a club at 7 a.m. on a Monday? Or do you want your brand to be represented in a way that's quiet and professional, etc., where the music is, yes, it's on, but maybe it's at a respectable level, or it doesn't go, above a certain volume, etc., etc. Now, in the same, in a really stark comparison is team 2, the house removalist guys. Yes, they're quiet, which obviously I liked a lot more, but they're also noisy when they needed to be, because let's face it, they're yelling instructions to each other because they are reversing in a massive Mack truck under a house. Somebody's cutting a pole while they're reversing the truck in. So they're yelling instructions at each other because there are people under the house, lives literally look like they were at risk. So yes, they had to yell and be noisy and talk to each other, but they did it in a really intentional way with what was obvious to me was a system and a standardization around it. And what I saw was the boss walking around the street, dropping letters in and talking to people to let them know what was happening, what to expect, and how noisy they were going to be. He gave out timelines, which was perfectly predicted. Yes, they were shouting at each other and having to be noisy when they were doing these critical parts of the move. They even had a whistle to communicate, but that noise and that disruption was limited to when was necessary. They weren't creating a party wherever they went. And I saw variations of this team come to site, come to the street quite a few times. And it was the same with all of them. I think I probably saw 5 trucks and about 25 people in total. So it's not like it was just this pocket of 3 people who came and were particularly quiet or particularly respectful. It was clear that it was the way this business operated. They all operated in the same way. When a neighbor walked past to check out what was going on, which a lot of neighbors walked past to check it out because it was pretty full on, the owner would say hello, and then every person on the team would also turn around and be like, hi ma'am, hi whatever. There was obviously a rule in place. We are respectful to neighbors, we're friendly, we don't want to disturb the street, etc., etc. So I guess what the lesson I'm sharing here is that team, I could see that there was a clear business and a team value that was being lived and breathed there. And that was probably to engage with the community, to be courteous, to be professional, to be clean with their language, and to be quiet when they could be. And gosh, it was impressive to watch. And it actually had me so curious that I went to their website to see actually if they had their business values listed there, because I was pretty sure that I'd be able to see the words to match the behaviors that I was seeing through the way they were operating. Now, they weren't listed on their website, but I'm positive based on what I could see that they must be written somewhere and stuck up in the lunchroom or something. So the lesson here is that the systemization of your business won't just help you with efficiencies behind the scenes and the way you feel as the boss and your efficiencies from a perspective of a return on investment. Yes, all those things will happen, but that won't be the only benefit. It also will help, systems and processes and efficiencies. When you work on them internally, they'll also be felt and impressed upon and seen by, people in the outside world experiencing your brand and your business. So as the entrepreneur, I want you to think about how and ask yourself, how is your brand being represented now? How do you want your brand to be felt and seen by people in the outside world? And is the way people are receiving your brand and seeing your brand and experiencing and interacting with your brand at the moment, is that standard? And for it to be standard and to be as obvious as what it was for me with these house removalists, team 2, it clearly was explicit. It was made explicit to everybody on the team that this is what we do and we don't do. And this is especially important when you, as the boss, you're not there with the team the whole time. If you can't be there at the front leading by example or being involved in all the things, which for many service-based businesses you can't, then this becomes even more important that people know how you want them to act without exception. And then you do spot checks or audits or things to make sure it's actually happening as you would want it to. So this concept translates in every business. And I know I'm talking about the tradies on the street, but it 100% translates in every business. It's not just tradies and house removalists. One of my clients, it was a financial business. We worked on what she called an internal charter, which outlined really clearly what her team couldn't do when it came to the way they were interacting with clients on behalf of her business and on behalf of her brand. And in particular, one of the things that was really important to her was how they couldn't email clients, because she didn't want clients getting emails at all times of the night or on the weekends, or receiving a Sunday morning email asking for information and misinterpreting that there was an expectation that they would work on a Sunday. She didn't want them getting that impression that they were being chased for stuff on the weekend. And similarly, she also didn't want the client to get the impression that her team could be chased for stuff on the weekends. So that needed to be really clear and explicit, because it was a remote team who were working flexible hours, and it would probably be very fair and reasonable for somebody without that explicit statement to assume that it's okay to send an email if you're working late at night, and the client would pick it up when it's suited to them. But actually, when this owner, this CEO, sat there and thought about how she wanted her clients to feel and how she wanted them to interact with her business, that was not okay with her. And we're able to, elaborate or build out this client charter to things like language, emails, and all the sorts of things to define how she wanted her clients to experience and interact with anybody within her brand. So this concept of standardization, it'll not only help you scale, it helps your team to stop having to make micro decisions all the time within their day-to-day. So that in itself will improve efficiencies, but it also helps you to scale through your clients experiencing the same things in the same way and knowing what they're going to get with your brand. So that is one of the ways that standardization and systemization is hugely helpful when you are, both looking to grow, but also just wanting to operate in a way that feels easier. So many lessons that I can share with you that have come out of the last 12 months of the tradies on my street, but they're the two big ones that I wanted to share today. And I hope they are helpful. To me, they feel like they're two things that are so obvious that I'm noticing that's lacking within the teams that do and can apply to every single business, which is why I wanted to share them with you today. So I hope that's been helpful. If at any stage you want to have a conversation with me, dive over to Instagram. That's where I usually hang out in the DMs over there. You're very welcome to book a Dream Team discovery call, of course, to have a conversation more specifically about you and your business. It's no obligation. I'd love to talk to you. But otherwise, have a great week, and I'll be back here next week.